At the World Expo site in Lisbon, the Canadian Pavilion pays a homage of sorts to that shared history. Maps illustrate the wanderlust of the old Portuguese explorers, who often ended up on North American shores, followed by those who wanted to exploit the new discoveries. Back then, the cod were known as the ocean's gold, and the miners were the fishermen. They'd leave Lisbon every spring, slowly sailing past the huge white monument to Prince Henry the Navigator, credited with helping to make Portugal one of the wealthiest and most powerful nations in the world. Over the centuries, the world changed, but Portugal's connection with Newfoundland and the great cod stocks did not. Every year, the ships would arrive. The men would go out in their dories at dawn, and then slowly, with hook, line, and bait, pull the cod from the ocean one by one. At the end of the day, after 12 hours or so of fishing, they'd return to the motherships to unload. They'd still have to clean and salt those fish before their 20-hour day would end. The cod campaigns lasted 6 months, a hard, hard life. Francisco Ramos knew that life well. As a young man, he lived it every year. He began when he was a teenager and spent much of his adult life working as a doryman. He made 36 cod campaigns in all, 10 aboard this ship, and he wishes he could see the Newfoundland of his youth one last time. His eyesight is going, his memory of those years is not.
Eu ia lá para fora, dava-me litro de água, só para o dia todo. O cozinheiro punha litro de água em cada vasilha que a gente tinha para levar. Só quando mais tarde começámos a ir a São Jones, em São Jones, é que a gente, quando metia água, vinha a mangueira, enchia-se tudo de água e a gente tomava banho e lavava a roupa e fazia-se tudo.
And it was dangerous work. Most years there'd be a man or two who drift too far and be lost. Others would be victims of accidents.
Perdi homem com o nevoeiro. Ao virar a vela, cambou e virou-se. Foi a única vez.
For hundreds of years we fished Terra Nova. Food for our families, the work was severe. Sailing senores across the broad sea, in all kinds of weather, year after year.
So St. John's was more than just a supply port for ships. It was also as close to a home that desperately homesick fishermen could get. And for Newfoundlanders, the sight of those ships meant the return of old friends. But it's all over. When we return, the last of the White Fleet back to Newfoundland. After 25 years' absence, the Criolla was back to the city that was its second home, the place it used to visit every summer. And after 3 weeks on board, the young Portuguese and Canadians had about the same reaction sailors have had for centuries. It's good to get back on land. For the young Newfoundlanders on board, they'd lived a bit of history, had a taste of what it was like, but now they were home. For the young Portuguese on board, it was their first look at the city their ancestors knew well, where many of their fathers and grandfathers made friends.
Yeah, I'm going to make a speech now.
Where you are? Here?
This voyage was fulfilled with symbolism because it united 48 young people from 2 countries with 500 years of history in common.
Decades ago, there would have been a forest of masts, dozens of ships. Now just one. A Newfoundland musical legend, Art Stoyles, has been coming down to the harbor since he was a child. 50 years later, he still plays the songs he learned from the Portuguese.
Portuguese song is not a Newfoundland song. Where'd you learn to play it?
The Portuguese waltzes, yeah, the Portuguese used to come in St. John's Harbour out the fishing out in Grandmax, right? They come in and they come in, dock up here and take their water supplies, right? And while that's going on, and all the other guys, or the young guys, they head for Benham Park, right? And so I'll be up there, playing the accordion during the bandstand, right?
The voyage of the Criolla revived memories for many people in Newfoundland. For a fishing family with a son on board, the most vivid memory was how the sea can be a dangerous place.
I'm sure he crossed my mind, especially the night thunderstorm. The lightning was like fireworks going off, and it looked like it was going right into the ocean. And he's out there on a boat.
And where was it?
He was anchored where? In
Freshwater Bay.
Freshwater Bay.
Off St. John's.
St. John's.
Anchored
Oh,
down.
but I didn't know that.
Concern born of experience. Newfoundlanders and Portuguese fought the same storms, often fishing alongside one another.
Yes, I would say they were liked, they were respected, they were fishermen like ourselves, and living on the sea, and, some of the conditions they were living under were pretty severe. I think I can't never remember a bad story about fishermen around here, their relationship with the Portuguese.
Newfoundlanders made friends of the Portuguese, businesses made money. And for the Portuguese, St. John's offered something that was invaluable, a place to go. Even 50 years later, those who went have not forgotten. There are those, too, who stayed. Inevitably, some Portuguese fell in love and then faced the intimidating prospect of meeting girlfriends' parents across a linguistic and cultural barrier.
He wouldn't come home to meet Mum and Dad. He was terrified. Anyway, finally he agreed he'd come up to the house and meet Mum and Dad. And he was going to be there at, I don't remember the time now, but he didn't arrive, and he didn't arrive. And about an hour and a half later, I went out the front door to see if I could see him. And there he was, standing by the corner, smoking cigarettes, afraid to ring the doorbell.
For those of us who grew up here, the arrival of the White Fleet ships in the harbor and the thousands of fishermen in the city, it was a regular part of summer in St. John's. Nobody really thought it would ever end. In fact, one summer just over 40 years ago, the Portuguese arrived here with a gift for the city, a statue that the fishermen had paid for themselves. It was a memento of sorts for a relationship that they thought, and we thought, would be permanent.
Statue of the Our Lady of Fatima.
Yes.
She came in on Julianus. First trip.
First trip of Julian, 1955.
Right.
They were both here on that day in 1955, two old friends, the retired Portuguese captain and a retired Newfoundland harbor pilot, Captain Thomas Goodyear.
5,000 men, 5,000 Portuguese in St. John's.
In St. John's.
When you brought the statue of the Lady of Fatima, and you all marched to the Basilica,
yes,
and you sang. 5,000 male voices all sang Ave Maria.
Ave Maria. Ave Maria, cheia de graça.
That parade was one of the major events of the period. My generation was a little young, but older Newfoundlanders and Portuguese remember it well.
This is my father, the oldest captain in that time, and I'm the youngest.
The oldest and the youngest. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
You were a young man.
Yes, I was captain. I was 23 years old.
23, master of a sailing vessel.
The statue slowly made its way to the Basilica just a few blocks up from the harbor. It was said at the time the church had never held so many people.
We were very fortunate to have known the White Fleet.
Yes.
In their glory days. They were magnificent. Yes.
Pleasure to meet you. I will write you next time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Today, the statue still sits there, in a corner of the Basilica, just off to the side of the altar where the Portuguese placed it 43 years ago. None of the young people who made the voyage aboard the Criolla were even born then. 2 days before the ship was due to go home again, they came by to see the church and its statue. A last chance for a group photo before the young Portuguese and Canadians go their separate ways. Having had the White Fleet experience, most will be returning to school. Few expect a career on the ocean. Jane and Zay, more than 30 years after they met and after a short time living in Portugal, this is now home, where Zay teaches at Newfoundland's Marine Institute. It may be the closest he and others here will ever get to the sea again. The way of life, once so familiar to the people of Portugal and Newfoundland, has become almost an anachronism.
Oh, I think it's a real loss to St. John's. On a summer night when the White Fleet would be in port, you could drive downtown and be bumper-to-bumper traffic going along the harbour road with people down there just looking, and you'd see the fishermen flying in dories on the deck, playing guitars, laundry hung on the deck.
We salute you, our brothers, who shared in the glory of small boats and hand lines to fish from the sea. Sharing, senores, now in the sorrow, our forefathers' legacy lost now to we.
But the end was as inevitable as progress. The old ways and the old schooners were doomed, and finally so were the fish. And the legacy for Newfoundland's next generation of fishers is at best uncertain. The Criola's task was complete. It had given us all a poignant reminder of what once was. Slowly, it pulled away from St. John's, put its sails back up, returning to Portugal for good. If you'd like more information about the White Fleet, check out the National website. The address is www.tv.cbc.ca/national. Now, please stay with us. The National will continue.